Welcome to another episode of Theological Sidebars. Good to have you with us. I am back doing my thing here in the office today, coming out with another video. This time, interesting topic. I like to kind of comment on things that are related to the church in the news. And so the article today that I have would like to comment on is this one: Christianity's decline, likely due to a collapse of marriage, fatherhood, says a survey. So think about that, right? We all look at the numbers and we say, what is happening to the decline? It seems like the church is declining in America. What's that all about? Everybody has their perspective of what that is. I thought this was an interesting take. I think it'd be good to look at it, to read it. And so let's look at this together. This actually comes from the Christian Post, and here's what it says. It says churches must work to restore healthy marriages and fatherhood to combat growing decline in Christianity, according to a survey released by a faith-based group. It goes on to say that J.P. DeGance is president of Communio, a nonprofit that equips churches to strengthen the marriage and relationship health of its members. On Monday, DeGance discussed the results of Communio nationwide study on faith and relationships at the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank. The conversation included these people. That's great. But let's get to the meat of the story, shall we? He said the study's results suggest that the decline in resident fatherhood and the collapse of marriage are likely explanations for the increase in religious non-affiliation throughout the United States. Now, I don't think it should be any shocker that there is a relationship to fatherlessness. And we see that sociologically. We talk about it. I mean, people have been talking about this for a while. But I will say that, I think what this piece is the idea of just what a married couple, what like a couple together can do and the impact they can have on a family. So look at some of these stats that they say here. It says the study's conclusions are drawn from nationwide survey, 19,000 attendees, 112 different churches across 13 states. They looked at Protestant and Catholic churches. It says overall, the survey found that 80% of church attendees grew up in a home where the mother and father stayed married, a trend that remained true regardless of age. In addition, 87% of all 25 to 29-year-old never married men in church had parents who remained married. Now, that is fascinating. So 87% of the guys that they found who were in church, they're 25 to 29-year-old. And that's, by the way, a category that we see largely gone right after. It's a huge deal. I mean, that's why there's so many ministries that are focused on how do we make sure we disciple kids young enough so that they don't just fall away at the end of high school. The truth is, what was it? I think it was Ken Ham's book. It said they're already gone? I think that was the idea that, I think he talks about how it was earlier on. It's like by those elementary age, if we don't do something now, and how we kind of apologetically answer questions and strengthen them, they're going to be gone. But a big key thing they said here is just think about what the home life was like. So if a mother and father were together, it said that 87% of all those guys said, yeah, my mom and dad are still together. So what this means, he goes on to say, is folks in church on Sunday are categorically more likely to have grown up with a resident dad in the home than someone who is not in church on Sunday. Noting that the results are not definitive, as 1 in 5 people in church grew up without married parents. So, and that's a great point, right? That to not have parents that are together does not mean that you're not going to, because that's the mystery of how this all works, by the way, is God will call whoever, right? And so it's not about, well, you're together, those people get in and that, but there is something to be said. I think just another layer for Christians to be seeing the value of a strong marriage, a value of sticking out marriage, right? To staying united together. It says, but it does make it less likely for those folks to show up on Sunday morning. I'm talking about if they don't have parents that are together. He presents the data. He said that findings show that religious non-affiliation began to increase between 1986 and 1991, and then rapidly grew in the mid-90s. According to Gantz, this result makes sense. The children who grew up in homes where their parents didn't remain married became adults. The Christian leader asserted that a married dad is the missing ingredient now, citing an Oxford University Press longitudinal study referenced in the Faith and Relationship Study. The longitudinal study followed 3,000 adults and 350 families within a 40-year time frame. One of the study's most notable findings, according to Gantz, is that adults who reported a close relationship with their fathers were more likely to report having the same faith as their parents by 25 percentage points. That is something I think that's worth thinking about, for dads, is what kind of relationship do you have with your kids? And I do think, by the way, there's something absolutely biblical about this. I know for some people, let me just say this, for some who might watch this and think this through, I know that there are some of you, maybe you're single moms at this stage of your life, and these are somewhat depressing. And I've heard people say this is depressing. Everyone just talks about the dad in the home, and I get that, right? Like you're on your own at this stage of life. You were not able to have, you had nothing to do with this, right? You tried to keep it together. This is just where you're at, right? And I know that it's hard for you to hear this, but I want you to not listen to this and think, well, there's nothing for me to do, because I don't think that's true. I think that you do with what you do the best with what God has given you, right? If this is the stage, this is what's happened in your life. Maybe maybe you had parts of this, and you can't go back and fix these things, right? Some of these things can't be. Maybe there's some peace that God can work through this, even in restoration. I don't know your situation, but I do think that we should say, for those who we are looking at now, I know it might be personal for some of us, for some of you out there who maybe your relationships are broken, but for those who are in marriages now, for those who are dating now, who are looking to get married, this is something that we must absolutely think through, right? It's something that we should, whether you have broken marriages or not, what you nail into your kids, what we're seeing even just take place. I mean, this is important, because it's one thing to say, like, oh, the Bible says this, and those are just generally good things that we should do, right? But it's another to say, like, if we don't do this, there's some legitimate things that we will see kind of play out. I mean, I'll just case in point, before I get to the Bible verse I was thinking of, it's like, as an Old Testament guy, when we look at the Old Testament law, there's a lot of reasons for why that stuff is there. I think deep theological reasons to think through some of those things. I think some of it's to mark the people of God, but there's also probably the other part of it. And we talk about this with my students. It's like, if you were to live like this, what would that mean, like, for just your benefit, your health, for your identity? I mean, there's a lot of positives that just come just by simply doing this. So, like, when we read verses like this, right? Let me go over to my Bible software. Like, when you read verses like this from the Apostle Paul, look at what Ephesians, like, fathers, don't stir up anger in your children, but bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Like, why is it that he zeroes in on the fathers? Right? Because it's important, that relationship that fathers have in leading their kids. He doesn't want them. Recognize, like, in this too, that the way that a father disciplines, the way that a father loves his child, that is a huge, huge deal. Bring them up in the training instruction of the Lord. So that's incumbent upon dads to lead, right? It's incumbent upon parents to disciple their kids. Right? This is not something you can just hand off to the church. It doesn't say, but bring them to the church who will train them and instruct them. Fathers, do it. Mothers, do it with the father. Then the other side of it, right, is this piece. And it's something that, as we start to see about, and they'll bring up in this article, like, is it any wonder that Paul describes the relationship that the church is to Christ in the terms of marriage? Wives, submit to your husbands to the Lord, because the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Now, the church submits to Christ, so wives are also to submit to their husbands in everything. And then it goes on to say, so husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church. And he gave himself for her to make her holy, cleansing her with the washing of water by the word. He did this to present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or anything like that, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands are to love their wives as their own bodies. For he who loves his wife loves himself. No one ever hates his own flesh, but provides and cares for it, just as Christ does for the church, since we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This mystery is profound, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. To sum up, each one of you is to love his wife as himself, and the wife is to respect her children. But recognize that Paul is talking about the relationship, and the way that we portray marriage is an image of the gospel. And so if we don't have that right, what do you think that communicates? It's not just that it's better for families to have strong marriages, but that it should. The way that we relate as a husband and a wife, the way that we relate as parents, all of that communicates these things. So I'm going to get back to the article because they're going to finish up. Let's look and just finish up reading the part right here. It says that right here that on the other hand, the study that found a closer relationship with their mother did not appear to have a statistical effect on whether an adult had the same faith as their parents. That's just something I feel like I've kind of noticed, by the way. I think you can kind of see that. People will respect mom and they'll come to church or things like that, but it's very common to see guys who have left. That's not a priority. But if dad's here, it seems to be that dad has the connection that they have to their father, to the church, is a different one. Very interesting, like I said, to see this kind of study talk about these things. Goes on to say that he referenced a book by Paul Vitz titled Faith of the Fatherless, The Psychology of Atheism, which analyzed 30 of the world's most renowned atheists. Throughout the book, according to Gantz, there's a reoccurring theme of absentee fathers or broken relationships with a dad. Christian leader asserted that Christians should not find this information surprising, highlighting the Bible's allusions to marriage. Yep. Most common analogy that God tells for the divine love story is the spousal love story, right? Renewal, fundamentally, for those in church interested in seeing renewal of faith, need to see a renewal of marriage. Now, I think that's interesting that he talks about this, because now this is where it is. It's like what we need to do is we need to focus back on stronger marriages. And here's another piece, by the way. He goes into some of the statistics here, which is about the loneliness that comes, the relationship problems that comes, specifically as they're looking at people who find themselves in the church that are cohabitating as opposed to having a marriage together. Like there's a lot of stuff that's on that. But I want to get to the thing that I thought was the most shocking of all. And this is something I think it should be something that we really think through. As it says in kind of in all of this that we see, he says that at one point, Gantz clarified he believes the church's role should be in forming healthy relationships, emphasizing that it must teach kids what that looks like before they start dating. Then he says this: according to the Faith and Relationship Survey, 85% of all churches in the United States report spending $0 annually on marriage and relationship ministry. That's crazy. I think about it, though. It's like, how much do we think about that in our budgets? Like, what are we going to do? How do we do that? We need to address it, and we should, at least in some respect, right? That we should have, whether it's a curriculum or we try to make it to where we bring people in or things, but like if we should make marriage a big deal. And how do we strengthen marriages? We need to think about doing this. I think that all of us should be looking at and say, if your church isn't doing it, so what do we do? How do we as a couple begin to go and to do things to strengthen our marriage? How do we grow in that side? But I think this is something I think is definitely interesting for a church. Say, well, let's look at our budget. Do we have anything in for marriage in there? Now, granted, like you could say in your budget, like we would probably pay for marriage things out of certain categories. But is that even on the agenda, right? That's a big thing I would say. Is it even on the agenda that we would say, these are things we want to spend on marriage and relationships to strengthen those in the church. I find it very, very fascinating that this is what you're seeing here. So anyways, he also kind of says he thinks it's important for pastors to begin to talk about these things and to talk about relationships and marriage. By the way, I think an easy way to do that is just begin to preach the Bible. And when you get to those marriage things, talk about that stuff as it comes up. I mean, granted, I think there's great times for series on that, but like when you just read through it, like if you were to just preach through Ephesians, bam, you're going to hit that stuff. You're going to get there. But yeah, I think it's interesting that, you look at this, what we're saying, there's a huge problem. Some of it may actually be tied to the fact that we're having these relationships disintegrate. And we're seeing that, and I think it'd be a wake-up call for people, especially men, to say, how do I take marriage seriously? Because that's the other stat, right? Let's just talk about this for a second. The stats are that people are getting married later and later and later in life. Okay. So why? And then we're having kids later and later and later and later in life. And why? And so we need to think, I think that's probably a correlation as well, right? To all this kind of stuff. But I think it's interesting to say, could the decline, some of that be tied to just strong marriages? A lack of strong marriages. That's what I mean. You would hope that the increase would be strong marriages, but could a decline be in conjunction with a lack of strong marriages, divorce numbers, things like that? Anyways, I absolutely do agree. I think the church should do more. I think all of us could do more to how we talk about marriage, how we build up marriage. I've said this so many times, and I'll finish out with this one. Like, how many times when we talk about people getting married, like we wear the game over shirts, we joke about, make sure you try to date around, make sure you spend enough time to get to know each other. Like we were so fearful of people wanting to get married. I think really when you focus on is really on these are covenants. These are things. If you're going to do it, you're in. Like don't make it like your life is over, like your life is beginning, but you're covenanting to stay with this person and what that teaches about the gospel. Anyways, I think it's just a wake up call. I think all of us should think through this. I think all churches, we should begin to think through. I'd love to throw this out to Andrew Marquez, just get his views on it, but he's not here today because he's busy and I'm busy too. I don't think I had time to prep anything with him. But I could do this one. So, hey, hope this was helpful. Like, subscribe. Thanks for listening. We'll talk later. Bye-bye.